It had been a long, quiet evening, the kind where the chill of winter creeps into every corner of a house. I'm Paula, in my 40s, and for years I've been raising my son Jeremy on my own. He's 24 now, and over the years, it's just been the two of us facing life's challenges, celebrating little victories, and sharing those rare, honest conversations that only a mother and her child can have. But that night was different. Something subtle shifted, though I didn't recognize it at first. Jeremy came home looking drained, shoulders slumped, eyes heavy with exhaustion. Between work and his studies, he'd been pushing himself hard, and it showed. "I'm not feeling well," he admitted softly, his voice rough with fatigue. Without hesitation, I suggested he lie down for a while, hoping rest would ease the tension I could see written on his face. The house was cold, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones, so I pulled a blanket over him. At that moment, it felt completely normal, a mother tending to her adult child. I stayed nearby, my thoughts wandering, just watching him settle in. Over the years, we'd always been close, but now, as I sat quietly, I noticed how the familiar closeness felt different, somehow more intense, more charged in a way I couldn't immediately explain. He shifted slightly, curling up under the blanket, seeking warmth, and I instinctively adjusted to make him comfortable. The room was silent except for the soft rhythm of his breathing. My own heartbeat seemed loud in the stillness, a reminder that we shared not only space but years of trust and connection. As the minutes passed, Jeremy's exhaustion deepened, and he leaned a little closer. I hesitated, a subtle tension threading through the air, but told myself it was normal. Just a mother comforting her son, I thought. Still, I felt something stirring inside me, an awareness of our proximity that was new, unexpected, and slightly unsettling. He rested his head near mine, and I found myself pausing, unsure of how to navigate the quiet intimacy of the moment. It was a closeness born of shared history, yes, but in the stillness, it felt heavier than before. Time seemed to stretch, the night folding around us. I reminded myself to breathe, to focus on the ordinary task of caring for my child, but my mind kept circling around small gestures, his hand brushing my arm, the soft sound of his sighs, the familiarity of his presence. The tension wasn't dangerous, but it was palpable, a quiet signal that boundaries were shifting in ways I hadn't anticipated. Then, just as I started to reconcile myself with the calm of the moment, there came a sharp knock at the door. The sound startled both of us, breaking the spell of silence. My heart jumped, and I stood quickly, glancing at Jeremy, whose expression was a mix of curiosity and unease. I moved to the door, relieved to see our neighbor, Paul, standing there. His friendly smile and casual concern grounded the moment, giving me a sudden sense of perspective. "Hi, Paula," he said warmly. "I just wanted to check if you were doing okay. It's been cold, and I thought you might need a hand with the heating." Grateful for the interruption, I stepped aside, letting him in. Jeremy stayed back in the hallway, watching silently, and I couldn't help noticing the subtle shift in his demeanor. There was curiosity, maybe even a hint of unease, as he observed Paul move about the house. I smiled politely, thanked Paul, and tried to ease the tension that had built between us, but the quiet awareness lingered. Even after Paul left, the air between Jeremy and me felt heavier, layered with unspoken questions, emotions neither of us had fully named, and the subtle realization that something had shifted in our dynamic. We had always been close, but closeness, I realized, could change its weight without warning, reshaping the familiar into something that demanded attention and careful thought. That night, as I finally sat down, I knew our conversation was only beginning. The comfort of familiarity had collided with the complexity of adulthood, and both of us were navigating a delicate balance between care, space, and understanding. The quiet tension, the small gestures, the subtle shifts in behavior, they all hinted at a deeper need to understand one another in new ways, and I had no choice but to face it. The next morning, the house was quiet in a way that felt almost too deliberate, as if it were holding its breath after the previous night's subtle turbulence. Jeremy had gone to his room early, and I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee, replaying every detail of our interaction. His presence lingered in the corners of my mind, the softness in his voice, the unspoken questions, the subtle hesitations. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us, even if it was intangible, even if neither of us had named it aloud. I tried to focus on ordinary tasks, hoping the morning routine would distract me. The kettle whistled, the toaster popped, but my mind kept returning to him. The house had always been our shared space, a haven where comfort and care came naturally, but now it felt like an arena of unspoken tension. I remembered the way he had watched Paul moving around the living room, his gaze intense, yet cautious. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it carried a weight that made my heart tighten. Jeremy finally emerged, brushing his hair back and rubbing his eyes. He looked tired but more composed than last night, and I felt a flicker of relief. "Morning," I said softly, trying to sound casual. He nodded, giving a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. We ate breakfast in silence, each of us aware of the presence of the other without saying anything. The conversation we had avoided was hovering in the room, like a shadow that refused to fade. I realized that closeness could be complicated, that intimacy didn't always mean comfort, it could also bring uncertainty, questions, and the need for boundaries. Jeremy had grown up under my care, but he was now an adult navigating his own identity, his own emotions. And I had to learn to navigate mine as well, balancing instinctive care with respect for his space. It was a delicate balance, one that demanded attention and honesty, even when it was uncomfortable. Later in the day, a subtle shift occurred. Jeremy approached me while I was folding laundry, his steps careful, almost hesitant. "Mom," he said quietly, "about last night. I just want to say I didn't mean to make things awkward." I looked at him, studying the lines of his face, the tension in his shoulders. "It's okay," I replied gently. "We're just adjusting. Sometimes emotions feel bigger than they should." He nodded, and I sensed a flicker of relief pass through him, a mutual acknowledgement that while things had felt strange, there was no harm done. We spent the afternoon together in quiet proximity. Sometimes he read on the couch while I sorted the kitchen, sometimes we shared a glance or a small conversation. The tension was still there, subtle and pervasive, but now there was also a sense of awareness, a willingness to navigate it carefully. I realized that emotional closeness between a parent and adult child could be profound and delicate at the same time, and it required both empathy and patience. By evening, we were both quieter, thoughtful in ways that didn't need words. There was a growing understanding between us, a recognition that our bond was strong, that it had evolved, and that it required care in its new form. The knock at the door in the previous night had reminded me that the world outside our home continued to exist, and sometimes, the intrusion of others could highlight the intensity of our private moments. And yet, in the midst of these reflections, I felt a sense of hope. Perhaps the tension wasn't something to fear, but something to understand. Perhaps we could learn to honor our closeness while respecting boundaries, to nurture our relationship without allowing confusion to take root. The challenge was daunting, but the possibility was real, and that gave me a quiet sense of reassurance as the night fell over our house once more. The following day, I noticed small things that revealed how much Jeremy was processing. He lingered near me in the kitchen, careful to maintain distance yet drawn by habit to be nearby. Even ordinary gestures, a shared glance, a smile, the brush of his hand against mine while passing a dish carried significance now, reminders that our bond had changed subtly, in ways neither of us had anticipated. It was as if the rhythm of our lives had shifted, and we were learning a new language of closeness, one that required sensitivity and patience. Jeremy and I decided to go for a walk in the neighborhood, something we hadn't done together in months. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of winter trees and distant smoke from chimneys. We walked side by side, our steps deliberate, sometimes synchronized, sometimes slightly apart, reflecting the ebb and flow of the unspoken tension between us. Conversation started slowly, hesitant, about work, plans for the weekend, small updates that allowed us to reconnect without delving into the heavier emotions, but the quiet moments were just as telling. When he paused to tie his shoelace, I caught a glimpse of his thoughtful expression, a fleeting moment of introspection that reminded me he was processing more than he spoke. I understood that what had happened at home wasn't something to push past or ignore. It required time, reflection, and gentle communication. We were learning to navigate the complexity of parent-child relationships in adulthood, where affection could exist without overstepping, and care could coexist with independence. After returning home, we settled into our routines again. Jeremy went to his room to work on a project, while I focused on dinner preparations. But the sense of mutual awareness lingered. Small gestures like passing by each other in the hallway, a casual touch on the shoulder, or even a shared look felt layered with meaning. I realized that the key wasn't avoidance, but mindfulness. Each moment was an opportunity to reinforce trust, maintain connection, and honor the boundaries that allowed our relationship to thrive without confusion. Later, as I folded laundry in the living room, Jeremy came in to ask a question about a household item. Our conversation was light, almost trivial, but it carried an undercurrent of familiarity and comfort. The ease between us was slowly returning, but it was a new kind of ease, one informed by awareness, reflection, and a shared commitment to maintaining a healthy connection. It was different from before, but it was real and valuable. As the day turned to night, I reflected on how emotions could complicate even the closest of relationships. Closeness wasn't inherently dangerous, but it required respect, communication, and honesty. Jeremy and I were learning this together, navigating the delicate balance of intimacy and independence, attachment and autonomy. The tension from earlier nights hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted into something manageable, something that could be understood rather than feared. And in that quiet reflection, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Our relationship had always been central to our lives, and now it was evolving into something more conscious and thoughtful. The challenge was real, but so was the possibility of growth. Together, we were learning to define what closeness meant, and to respect the boundaries that would allow our bond to remain strong, healthy, and nurturing as we moved forward. The following week, the house seemed quieter than usual, almost as if it, too, was holding its breath, waiting for us to find our balance again. Jeremy and I had begun to navigate this new rhythm, learning how to coexist with awareness of our emotions without letting them overwhelm our day-to-day lives. But the memory of that night and the subtle tension it carried lingered, like a shadow behind every glance and touch. I realized that understanding our relationship required patience, not only with each other, but with ourselves. One afternoon, I found myself in the living room, sorting through old photographs. Jeremy entered quietly, holding a cup of tea, and watched me without interrupting. His presence was comforting, but it also carried a certain weight, a reminder of the intimacy we had shared and the emotions we were still untangling. I smiled at him, gently, hoping to bridge the gap between our shared history and the careful boundaries we were learning to maintain. "Mom," he said softly, "do you ever think about how things change as we grow?" His voice was tentative, reflective, and I felt a wave of understanding pass through me. "All the time," I admitted. "We grow, we change, and sometimes we have to find new ways to connect. Just because things feel different doesn't mean they're any less important." He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips, as if he were relieved to hear me voice what he had been struggling to express. We spent the next hour talking quietly, not about last week's tension, but about life, plans, and memories from years past. Each story and laugh served as a gentle reassurance that while emotions could feel intense and overwhelming, they could also be navigated with care and honesty. I realized that what mattered most was creating a space where both of us felt safe, emotionally, mentally, and physically. That safety was what would allow our bond to remain strong. Later, Paul stopped by again, this time with a friendly smile and a light-hearted comment about the weather. His presence reminded us both that the world outside our home continued to exist, and it gave me a chance to observe Jeremy's reactions. There was a subtle alertness in him, a flicker of awareness that he noticed another person's presence. It was a quiet reminder that as much as we could share privately, we also had to remain mindful of the world beyond our home. By evening, the air in our house felt lighter. Jeremy and I shared a simple dinner, exchanging small, meaningful gestures, a touch on the shoulder, a reassuring smile, a shared glance that said, without words, that we were both aware of our closeness and the care it required. I understood that relationships were not static, they were living, breathing things that demanded attention, reflection, and compromise. And in that moment, I felt a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to nurture our bond with respect and mindfulness. Over the next few days, Jeremy and I settled into a more natural routine. Mornings became moments of quiet companionship, afternoons filled with shared tasks, and evenings dedicated to conversation or mutual hobbies. The tension that had once defined our interactions gradually eased, replaced by a conscious awareness of our emotional landscape. Each interaction was a choice, a reaffirmation that our bond was valuable and worth preserving without confusion or overstepping. One afternoon, Jeremy asked if I could help him with a project he had been struggling to complete. We sat side by side at the dining table, papers and books spread around us, and worked together. There was a rhythm to our cooperation, a sense of teamwork and mutual respect that felt both familiar and new. I noticed small signs of relief on his face, his shoulders relaxed, his brow unfurrowed, and I realized that our careful navigation of emotional boundaries was paying off. Later, he confided in me about a challenge he was facing at work. His words were hesitant at first, but as I listened, I offered guidance and encouragement. The conversation was honest, thoughtful, and grounded in trust. I could see that Jeremy felt safe sharing with me, and I felt honored that he trusted me enough to be open. In that moment, I understood that the closeness we shared didn't have to be fraught with tension, it could be a source of strength, provided we approached it with care. That evening, after finishing the last of the chores, we sat quietly in the living room. The house was bathed in the soft glow of the lamp, and the winter chill had been kept at bay. We didn't speak immediately, but the silence was comfortable, not heavy. I realized that the most meaningful moments often came not from grand gestures, but from shared presence, mutual respect, and the willingness to honor boundaries while maintaining connection. As the night deepened, I reflected on how far we had come. The tension, confusion, and uncertainty from that earlier night had not disappeared entirely, but it had transformed into something manageable, something we could understand and navigate. We were learning the delicate art of being close without crossing lines, of being emotionally available without overwhelming each other. And in that awareness, there was hope. The following weekend, Jeremy and I decided to tackle a larger household project together. Working side by side, moving furniture, cleaning, and reorganizing, we laughed, shared stories, and discovered new aspects of each other's personalities. It was a reminder that collaboration, openness, and patience could strengthen relationships in ways that mere words could not. Our connection felt balanced, grounded, and respectful. That evening, we sat down to dinner, and I watched him carefully, noticing how his demeanor had changed, calmer, more present, more confident in our shared understanding. I felt the same, a sense of ease replacing the earlier tension. We spoke openly about plans for the upcoming week, but also about our feelings, our growth, and the importance of maintaining emotional honesty while respecting each other's space. As the night came to a close, I realized that what we had navigated together, the intensity, the discomfort, the uncertainty, had ultimately strengthened our bond. Jeremy and I had learned to balance closeness with boundaries, care with autonomy, and trust with mindfulness. The lessons were subtle, sometimes difficult, but profoundly valuable. Before heading to bed, we shared a quiet moment in the living room, side by side on the couch. I felt a sense of gratitude and hope, understanding that relationships were living things that could grow stronger when nurtured thoughtfully. The challenges we had faced had not broken us, they had refined us, teaching us the importance of patience, communication, and awareness. And as I turned off the lights and closed the door to my bedroom, I knew that our bond had been strengthened in ways that would carry us forward. Jeremy was not only my son, but also a young adult learning to navigate life, and I was not just a parent but a partner in understanding and guidance. We had faced confusion, tension, and unspoken questions, and come through it with respect, love, and awareness. If this story resonated with you, and you'd like to explore more about navigating family dynamics, emotional growth, and healthy boundaries, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to join us for more stories that dive deep into the complexities of human relationships.